Welcome back. You're watching News X. My name is Vineet Malhotra. In a primetime address from the White House last night, U.S. President Donald Trump claimed the one-month-old U.S.-Israel campaign against the country of Iran is nearing completion, with major military objectives almost achieved. He compared this war to longer historical conflicts like World War II, Korea and Vietnam to frame it as relatively brief, while noting that regime change was never the stated goal. Yet key Iranian leaders, including Supreme Leader Ayatollah Ali Khamenei, have been eliminated. Trump said that Iran's Navy, Air Force, radar systems and top leadership have been decimated. He vowed that the US will hit them extremely hard to send it back to the Stone Ages for the next 2 to 3 weeks to finish the job, potentially striking power grids, but left the door open for a deal with what he called Iran's more reasonable new leadership. On the critical Strait of Hormuz, Trump washed America's hands, telling oil importing nations, including those in Asia and Europe, to step up and secure the waterway themselves, offering US help but criticizing others, especially Europeans, for not acting earlier. In a sharp response to US President Donald Trump, Iran's military has vowed to continue the conflict in West Asia until Washington faces lasting humiliation and surrender, is what they said. Despite highlighting military gains, Trump failed to provide a concrete timeline or roadmap for ending the war. He stated that the conflict would end very fast, but gave no specific plan. All right, we're going to talk about this with someone very special. Joining us all the way from the United States at this point in time is Mr. John Spencer, a very known face in corridors of defense and military, former US Army officer. John, really appreciate you taking out the time and speaking to us. And as always, lovely to see you and lovely to have you. Well, you know, John, the first thing that comes to my mind is that the US has claimed that there's been major degradation when it comes to Iran's military capabilities. But intelligence so far is suggesting that there has been partial destruction. 1/3 of their arsenal has been destroyed, 2/3 of it is still available. Are we seeing this, or whatever Donald Trump is saying, as real battlefield success, or do you think this is headline management?
No, I think especially while people will argue what the strategic outcome will be, I would push back against that intelligence assessment. Whether it's the number of missile salvos, although absolutely they still retain capability, but counting the number of missile salvos or drone salvos that they are able to launch, to say that it hasn't been, I actually haven't heard many people arguing that militarily, although they'll say tactical gains, not strategic outcomes, militarily that the attack, not just on stockpile, right? It's not just about what they have today, it's their ability to ever produce more. And of the 15,000 targets that the United States and Israel, which I think there is a bit of, as a kind of military analyst, you have to look at what's new in war. Of those 15,000 targets eliminated, the precision-guided munition being 90+% of those, even the heavy ordnance that is dropped now from like a B-52 will still have a precision-guided aspect, hitting exactly of this means to project power outside of Iran, which is what the president restated in his speech. You can't say that the United States and Israel hasn't considerably degraded their existing stockpile and their ability to produce more. Every manufacturing plant, every rocket fuel site, every aspect of how do you maintain this capability to amass greater and greater, farther reaching missiles.
John, you know, I always wanted to ask you this, and in fact, this is a feeling in this part of the world as well. Has the United States and the Israeli government underestimated Iran's potential to fight an asymmetric war?
My personal opinion, based on what we know, although I come with this with a heavy dose, as you know, in any war, that most of what we know is hidden behind a fog. In this case, sometimes it's a mushroom cloud created by the execution of military and political leaders or the elimination, let's say elimination, not execution of military leaders. I don't think, having worked in the Pentagon with tens of thousands of people that plan to plan, I mean, it's almost laughable, not to you, but to those that have said, like, the United States didn't properly plan for the possibility of the Strait of Hormuz. I mean, there are entire teams in the Pentagon whose only job is to plan scenarios in specifically in the Strait of Hormuz, and then what capabilities would be need to be brought to bear to stop that. What capabilities are Iran building? I think people are overestimating the strength of the regime, right? Because everybody now, well, then they'll go into like this Maoist revolutionary ideology of, you have the watches, we have the time, we'll just wait this out aspect, and they're not even being truthful on the fragility of the regime in and of itself. We already have mixed messages from whoever's in charge now, from the Iranian president saying that they're not going to attack their neighbors, and then they keep doing it, or the commander of the IRGC, the new one, saying something different, that they're going to continue to do this. Even the toll system in the Strait of Hormuz that they've set up, it's really hard for people to make such claims of certainty. Well, I'll give you what I think is likely is that I do not believe the United States military or Israel underestimated the asymmetric aspect, not the drones, not the Strait of Hormuz, that aspect, and have been systematically attacking the centers of gravity of the Islamic regime, even within the asymmetric element. The attack of the besieged checkpoints, if they can find one, the attack of all the pieces and parts that the regime needs to implement these, even asymmetric, which just means weaker, which clearly Iran is a weaker party. So of course they're going to implement an asymmetric strategy, since they don't have a symmetric strategy to implement against the United States, let alone Israel.
John, a two-part question for you rolled into one. What do you think is the end objective for the US? Is it change in regime? Is it deterrence? Is it containment? And the follow-up to this question is, John, can this be achieved without boots on ground?
It's a great question. And I've had to, again, I don't want to, I have my personal opinions, but I want to go to, just like Clausewitz said, don't try to force the war into something foreign to its nature. Look at the political goals. And people keep saying that the political goals have changed, and I can document every official speech from the president to the Pentagon briefings to even White House tweets. The four goals are straight. So what do I imagine, John Spencer, as the end game of this is pretty much the achievement of all four of those goals. Of course, some of those goals are harder to do. And the ideal that regime change is a part of that is just not true. And the president has said multiple times that he has talking to people, that as long, that people are more reasonable, as he said in his speech last night, that you can get to a political outcome. Now, boots on the ground, as I was a part of the invasion of Iraq to overthrow the Saddam regime, 170,000 troops penetrating the capital of the city with one brigade, 3,000 forces, and that was 23 years ago. Military technologies have vastly changed. I do not believe it is necessary, but I'm not ruling it out, because war is a contest of will. You don't want your enemy to know your strategy. You want your enemy to fear what you're possibly going to do, and the worst strategy is to tell them what you're not going to do. Like, we're not going to put a single American boot on Iranian soil. I think that would be a very failed strategy to achieving what has been reiterated are the goals. Are there potential scenarios and now ready forces to do that? Absolutely. Whether it's seizing islands, whether it's seizing nuclear sites, all that is, I wouldn't underestimate U.S. military possibility or capability.
John, how dangerous is Iran's use of its proxies, like the Houthis, the Hezbollahs, especially when it comes to prolonging this war?
Absolutely. You never underestimate your enemy, and that's the whole, what the United States and Israel have to factor in, the risk factors. The terror proxies from Hezbollah, Houthis, Hamas, Shia-backed groups in Iraq, they're all dangerous in and of themselves, although considerably different than they were before October 7th, when Iran support to Hamas launched the October 7th attack. And you did see Hezbollah, the remnants of Hezbollah, re-enter attacking Israel at the start of this operation. So we have to assume by Iran direction, because they are the greatest terror proxy army ever built by a terrorist state. Iran passed them $1 billion just in 2025, last year, The ideal that they're interested in peace and coexistence, it's just not true based on all data. They're dangerous, absolutely. Even the fact that Yemen, the terrorist pirate empire of the Houthis, are threatening to again attack global shipping off their coast, although they learned the hard way equally last time they did that. They're all factors. The enemy still has a vote, and I don't discount Iran's. I would not call it escalation ladder that I just for some reason as a military strategist don't like using. Iran gets to implement its strategy, but it also has to factor in things that the United States and Israel doesn't have to. The Islamic regime in Iran has to factor in its survival. And this is the ideal that they're strong and they can continue this for as long as they need to. Just discount recent history back to January of 2026 when tens of thousands of Iranians went to the streets to say that they're not happy with the regime's investments in lack of investments in infrastructure, but investment in terrorist capabilities. I think that factor, it has to be factored in Iran's belief that it can continue, even if it tells its proxies to go out and attack. Everybody has that vital interest of survival, and the Islamic regime in Iran absolutely has the interest to survive, which factors into what its strategies it will or will not do.
John, how important or serious is the Strait of Hormuz factor, and is this likely to reshape global energy geopolitics? As you know, in the past, nations have gone to war over energy.
Absolutely, and so it is absolutely a factor. For me, it is from a grand strategy perspective. I wrote this in the Wall Street Journal about reducing this, the second most important strait in the world for global economy, for the global energy trade, to be exact, for oil and gas. And there could be things to be done to reduce this, because this isn't the first time that in the 47-year Islamic regime in Iran this isn't the first time that they have used this strait, which should be the interest of every nation involved in the global international order, is the freedom of the waters, the freedom of navigation outside of protecting for defensive purposes your international, your own territorial waters, threatening the international shipping. So this isn't the first time. If you remember back to the end of the Iran-Iraq war, Iran had started attacking commercial ships, and the United States was involved in Operation Earnest Will, and for over a year escorted commercial ships through the strait, but also imposed heavy costs on the Iranian military when there was a U.S. ship hit. And this isn't 1988. The capabilities of both sides are vastly different. So you could do what we call a relative power comparison of what capabilities does Iran have to continue to hold the strait, then what can the United States do about it? It's a complex conversation. Absolutely has to be factored in, because there are things that the United States could do today that it hasn't, out of concern for that impact, because oil is a global commodity. And actually, when Russia invaded Ukraine in 2022, we saw the greatest spike of oil, over 122 barrels for for a considerable amount of time. That was worse of an impact to the global economy. But I agree that it is a factor. And you have, as I'm sure you know, the UK chairing a panel of 37 countries, to include India, on
Correct.
what can be done diplomatically, economically, to not only open it, but to ensure that it's no longer used as this gun to support terrorism. And I wish more people would understand that just by doing what Iran is doing with the Strait is an act of terrorism in violation of the global international order. And of course, the United Nations voted, which is this whole ideal of diplomacy, voting that they should stop that. And just like India did in Operation Sindoor, there comes a point when enough is enough, and action has to be taken to stop a terrorist regime from continuing its behavior.
You're absolutely right, John. Last question before I let you go. I always wanted to ask you this. As a military strategist, are we seeing a shift towards non-linear warfare? There's a transcendence towards proxy, towards economy, over conventional victory?
No, I think all warfare is non-linear. Of course, we study in war colleges all the great military theorists talking about whether all warfare is attritional warfare can be debated, but the theories of victory, of achieving either a limited objective or an unlimited. And I think this is why I love my job. I mean, it really becomes War 101. I mean, like, what is the goal? Is it an unlimited objective, like a regime change? What would be necessary? But also these revolutions in military affairs. I mean, I study very often Clausewitz, who was writing at a time when Napoleon had changed all of warfare with the revolution of military affairs by what's called leve en masse. And I think what we currently are seeing is a revolution in military affairs in the ability to use precision, the artificial intelligence, penetration to dominate another nation. We can argue about they won't crack, they won't cry uncle, as we call, as President Trump might say. That's just not the history of military affairs either. And we're seeing over the last 3 years as well. It isn't, I don't like these nifty maxims about escalation ladder. This is war. This is the pursuit of political goals through the use of force or the threat of use of force. And right now, the United States is threatening the use of greater force if necessary in a very historical implementation of strategy to achieve limited goals, in this case, not unlimited goals, which is this whole boots on the ground, not understanding that the United States may, and I say may, be happily fine with the Islamic regime in Iran, a new, which you can't argue, new leadership, agreeing to new terms, which would be trust but verified, whether it's with the nuclear, with the Strait of Hormuz, the missile program. To achieve that goal with this new regime, which is ultimately the objective of war, as well as that political end, political declaration.
Absolutely right. John, always a pleasure. Thank you so much. You're as best as they come. Thank you for your time. Appreciate it.